Hello and welcome to Centerpoint Business Clinic, hosted by Centerpoint Public Library in Centerpoint, Alabama. I'm Octavia Kuranksy, and each month we meet here for a few minutes to discuss issues that often affect small businesses. Now, last month we talked about time management. This month we will be discussing finance. This is Finance 101. In particular, we'll be talking about loans and the factors that lending agencies consider in making loans. By the way, you can always access previous discussions about the business clinic on the Centerpoint Public Library's Facebook page and YouTube channel. So if you've missed any, you can check there in the archives. I have to start by telling you that money is not the answer to every business problem. I know this because I've worked for several entrepreneurial development centers, and in my experience, sometimes a shortage of money is really just a symptom of inexperienced management on the part of the business owner. And it shows up as a cash flow problem. And I say this because I've seen plenty of small business owners with more than sufficient cash flow crash and burn because they were making uninformed decisions about their business. Conversely, I've seen small business owners with nominal resources go on and do well because they were willing to learn and change their management practices, and so they got a different outcome. They were able to improve their outcome without throwing money at it. Just something to think about. But having said that, there are times when more capital is needed, and frankly, it's better to have access to capital and not need it than need it and not have it. So today, I'm going to give you 6 factors. There are many, many more, believe me, but I'm going to give you 6 factors that, in my opinion, banks look at for the most part in considering whether or not you're an attractive candidate for a business loan. But before I do that even, I want to say a few words about banks. And I'm going to use the word banks, although that includes credit unions, nonprofits that makes loans to small businesses. I'm just going to use banks to keep my sentences shorter and easier to follow. Banks are businesses, actually, and their business is making money. That's what the banking business is about. It's about making money. It is not to do favors. And that is why they ask for so much documentation, which is a common complaint I hear from small business owners looking for loans, that the banks want a lot of documentation. But the banks are trying to assess whether or not you're a good risk. And so that's why they ask for all this documentation. They want to see what your management practices are, how you make decisions, what is your history, because they want to reduce their risk as much as possible. They are, after all, as I've said, in the business of making money and not losing money. Keep that in mind when you're preparing your proposal. All right, so here are the 6 factors that, in my opinion, are the most common, the most prominent ones that banks use in making the decision whether or not you're an attractive candidate for a loan. Factor number 1, you're a startup. This is a problem for a lending institution, startups. And the reason why is because you don't have a track record. You're a question mark. They have no way of knowing or judging whether or not you know what you're doing. And according to the Small Business Administration, the failure rate for startups is somewhere around 70-75%. Think about that. 3 out of every 4 businesses that are started up will fail. That means that if the bank makes enough wrong decisions, they will lose money. And as we've already agreed, they are not in the business of losing money. They're in the business of making money. And so if you're a startup, it's going to be difficult for you to secure a loan from a regular lending institution such as a bank. You might have to be a little more resourceful, and I have a suggestion for you later around that. Factor number 2, your credit score. Now, each financial agency, each bank, sets its own threshold for what is an acceptable credit score, what they're comfortable with. I think in this business environment, it's safe to say it's around 700. Credit scores are considered because credit scores are thought to be indicators of your reliability, whether or not you pay your debts on time and full, which of course a lending institution would be interested in. Even if you think that you know what your credit score is, I would recommend that you find out. You can check with at least 2 of the leading credit reporting agencies and find out not only what the score is, but what kind of notations are made in your credit history. You could be surprised. Credit reporting agencies make mistakes. You may find, for example, there's a note about somebody else's credit issue. Or you may find out that there's something on there that should have been removed ages ago. And remember, the credit score is figured into whether or not you're an acceptable candidate for a loan, and sometimes even for a job. So you really want to know for sure what your credit score is and what's in your credit history. So startups and credit scores are the first 2 factors. Factor number 3. The type of business that you're proposing makes a difference as to your chances of getting that loan. Some industries have historically and notoriously high failure rates. At the top of the list is probably restaurants. Restaurants are very, very expensive to start. They're very, very expensive to maintain, and they are not high profit margin kind of businesses. Most restaurants, in fact, don't make their money off food. They make their money off alcohol sales, which is why most restaurants try to get an alcohol license, because that's where the real money is made. But they have a reputation, they have a history of being of a high failure rate. And that means that the loan would go into default and the bank would be unable to recoup its investment, which is not a desirable position for a bank to put itself in. Now, if you're thinking of starting a restaurant or any other any other kind of industry that has issues with a high failure rate, you might want to go to a bank of your choice. Go to 2 or 3, as a matter of fact, and ask them what their policy is on lending. If you're a startup, ask them what their policy is on lending to startups. If you're going into a restaurant business, ask them what their policy is on lending to restaurants. Something that may enhance your application, even if you are a startup or a restaurant, is what you're going to be using the money for. Banks prefer to make loans for purchases of equipment, building purchases, capital purchases, land acquisition, because this could indicate that the business is expanding, that is, it is doing well and making a profit. Also, you will notice all those things, land, equipment, and buildings, can be sold. So in the event of a problem with the loan, the bank can always sell those items and recoup some of their investment. Some items that the bank does not like to loan for are operating costs, by the way, like utilities, because that's just money out. There's nothing for the bank to sell to help them recoup their investment in you. So they generally don't like making operating cost loans, salaries, that kind of thing. Keep that in mind when you're considering making application for a loan. Factor number 4. Incomplete financial reporting might be getting in the way, could get in the way, it will get in the way if it's incomplete. Banks have a standard for keeping financial documents. It's called GAAP, or Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. And the bank looks for those in the financial document that you submit. If they see some record keeping that is outside of those standards, too far outside those standards, it's a red flag for the bank. They need to know that you are in fact profitable. They need to know exactly what your financial situation is. And so that's why there's a standard in the first place, because experts review these documents, and if they see some discrepancies, and using these principles helps them see discrepancies, that's a red flag, because it may indicate that the business owner is not aware of the correct use of money or business management. I always recommend for the first year in business that the business use a professional bookkeeper or CPA to set up the books and teach the business owner how to keep financial documents. This is so important that a discrepancy here, such as the mixing of personal and business finances, is such a huge red flag that alone can get your application declined. Just incomplete records or records that have some suspicious, let's say unorthodox practices, that alone can get your application declined. So think about hiring a CPA or bookkeeper at least for a year. It could save you a lot of time, and actually it could save you a lot of money in the long run. Factor number 5. Some industries require, if you're looking for a large amount of money, be prepared to supply either a down payment and or collateral, especially in those industries that have a high failure rate. Now, when I tell small business owners this, they'll say, well, if I had a down payment or if I had collateral, I wouldn't need to borrow it from a bank. And I understand that makes a kind of sense. But you have to look at it from the point of view of the bank who is holding the pot of gold. And that is they are trying to protect their investment. The collateral and or the down payment would be held in escrow. And again, in the event of a default on the loan, then that would go to the bank. It would help them to recoup some of their loss. Some nonprofit lenders, and there are two in the immediate area, have more lenient lending practices, and you might want to check with them because they'll take a different kind of collateral. Two I'll mention are Accion, ACCION. You can Google that and make an appointment. They have a local office in Birmingham. And the other is TrueFund, TRUFUND, also has an office in Birmingham and will make smaller amounts of smaller loans and require less collateral or less of a down payment. This is actually a very deep and profound question for a business owner, because the collateral, if it's not equipment or land or a building, has to be substantial, like a car, your car, or a house, your house. This is because the bank says, you want us to put skin in the game? Then you're going to have to put skin in the game. So this is actually a really deep and profound question for small business owners, especially in startup. Passion about your business is not enough. This is a game of numbers. So think about that when you are considering how much money you're asking for, because you may be asked for a down payment and or collateral. Lastly, factor number 6 is timing, and this is kind of a secret in the industry that I'm telling you here. When you apply for a loan, timing may be of an issue. Let's say, and I'm just going to give you an example because to try to explain it would just take, from here to next week. But let's say the bank operates on a regular calendar basis from January to December. Not all banks do, but let's say this one does. Their actual loan season may be shorter than that. It may be from March to September. And even with it, now they may make loans outside of those time periods, but this is when they really focus on making loans. And let's say within that time period, they may even have a cap on how much they're going to loan. I know this is going to shock you and you're going to fall out of your chair, but banks do not have unlimited resources. They don't have unlimited resources because they are also investing in other opportunities to make money. They buy and sell real estate. They invest in the stock market. If it's a huge bank like Chase, they may be making loans to other countries, as a matter of fact. So they have other uses for their money. So if the bank has a lending cycle, let's say from March to September, and they have a cap on how much money they're going to loan, then one would want to find that out and make application within that time period at the beginning, preferably. And if there is a cap, make your loan amount within that cap. Some banks, for example, will decide that they're only going to loan $50 million this year, and of the $50 million, they're only going to loan $12 million to farmers. So if you're a farmer and you wait until September to request a loan and it's $12 million, you may be out of luck, depending, because they've already reached the end of their cycle, and if they've been successful in getting some really good candidates, they may have already loaned out all the money that they're going to lend for that year in that category. Yes. How would you find this out? You would find this out by visiting some banks and asking. You can go to a bank, talk to a loan officer without making application, and find out all kinds of very interesting and helpful information. And I recommend that. Don't go to 6 region branches. Go to a Regions branch, a Wells branch, a Cadence branch, a PNC branch. Go to different banks and talk to different loan officers, because different banks have different policies. And you want to make the best choice that you can of which bank to approach and when. Do a little reading and prepare yourself before you go for these conversations. And remember, do not make application at that time. You're just having a conversation. That way it will not have an effect on your credit score, which was the second factor. Yes, when you make an application to a bank, it has an effect on your credit score. All right, so what to do now that we talked about the 6 factors? The first is the one that I suggest is the one I just talked about. Go and have some conversations with some banks and credit unions, whoever you think you feel comfortable with. Tell them what you plan to do, how much you need, what kind of collateral you have, etc., and then let them tell you who they prefer to loan to. Let them give you those details, and then you will know what you need to shore up in your application, and this will give you a greater chance of getting access to that loan. Number 2, fix your credit. As I pointed out, credit agencies make mistakes, and you really need to know what's going on with your credit history. And these first 2 suggestions are, I believe in them because, first of all, they're doable. We cannot control everything that affects whether or not we get that loan. For example, COVID. Who could have predicted and who could have controlled COVID and its effect on the economic situation? Or China may have some huge plague of its own, and your supply chain may dry up and you don't have the stuff to sell in your store. Any hurricane, any number of things out of our control can affect our business environment. Fortunately, the factors that we've talked about are within our control. And that's what makes it kind of wonderful, because these are things that we can do something about. Above all, this is my last thing, don't get stuck, get help. And there is help. The Small Business Administration runs what are called Small Business Development Centers. You can get technical assistance there. You can get a mentor assigned to you that can walk you through a loan process application, as well as mentor you through managing your business.